Okay. Hi, Joanna Weave here from Copy Hackers. I am guest hosting on Growth Hacker TV today, and I have Sean Oliver, head of product marketing at Optimizely, here to talk with me for a little bit. Sean, thanks for agreeing to chat.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
Yeah, cool. Me too. Okay, so you are in a very enviable sort of position. You're head of product marketing at the ultra cool company Optimizely, which is, perhaps the best known split testing solution or platform that's out there. Hopefully, any competitors who are listening aren't like, don't. But it's a really well known solution, right? Now, before Optimizely, you were at LinkedIn, which is also pretty cool. You were behind that Who's Viewed My Profile feature, which I personally adore. I use
Yes.
it all the time, right? Very cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. So you've worked with some really highly admired companies that have, experienced this sort of hyper growth, LinkedIn and Optimizely being those two big examples. But you've also worked at that long-standing success story known as Microsoft. So having been with, if I can just like jump right into my first question for you,
Yeah.
having been with these businesses in various stages from, what feels like just the beginning for Optimizely today to the very established world of Microsoft, I'm wondering, right off the bat, if you can tell us, based on your experience, on what you've seen, how do you see it being different to grow the business for a young tech company like Optimizely versus an older tech company like Microsoft?
Sure. It's something I've thought a lot about, sort of, especially more recently since I've been kind of reflecting on, the companies that I've worked on in my career and realized that I've kind of been getting progressively smaller as I've sort of advanced. I think one thing about Microsoft is that sort of big growth decisions need to be made really thoughtfully. And at Optimizely, what I've noticed, and also at LinkedIn to a lesser extent, is that bigger growth decisions need to be made very quickly because the market is changing so quickly. And I think the challenge that companies like Optimizely and other smaller companies that are sort of kind of crossing the chasm, as it were, in terms of kind of getting market share and penetration, are generally not don't have the luxury of being taking their time and sort of thinking about things and making really thoughtful decisions. Not that we don't make thoughtful decisions, but I think we need to make sure that it's most important that we're timely and that we move fast. And so I think that's a lot of where growth hacking kind of comes in. Is that the advantage of growth hacking is that you can move quickly and iterate and test and see what happens and then roll things out kind of progressively rather than sort of from the ivory tower, kind of like making decisions and sitting on your huge kind of customer base, which is a lot of what Microsoft does. I think Microsoft's in a position where large growth won't really happen
Mm.
anymore, just for a lot of their core products, because they've reached such a significant level of market penetration that there aren't that many more people to sort of grow to. So it's really about driving engagement and sort of maintaining their market position.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Um, Now, my next question on the same, train of thought is around, I wanted to learn about growth hacking techniques that you've seen carried over across, the different organizations you've been with, but it sounds like maybe Microsoft didn't have as many. I mean, growth hacking as a term tends to be rather new as well. Doesn't
Yes.
mean that the concept is so. But I am wondering, what, if any, growth hacking and marketing techniques have you seen carry over from Microsoft to LinkedIn to Optimizely? I mean, I don't know, I was wondering what are the big players doing that the little guys should think about? Maybe in the big player space, you might want to like focus more on LinkedIn and Optimizely then if Microsoft isn't doing that much.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it's not necessarily the case that Microsoft doesn't do growth hacking. I think
Okay.
in my specific area, there probably wasn't as much of that. I worked on the Windows business, which is box software. It's a much more established, sort of slower moving kind of space that's changing with Microsoft. I mean, I've seen some of the recent announcements, but I think they're getting to a point where they're a little bit more connected in terms of like more frequent releases and having a more dynamic product. But in general, what I've found is that since moving to the web, and I think this is also true of the web areas within Microsoft, so like the Bing team, for example, or the Microsoft store, like Microsoft.com, things like that. Like those areas businesses are much more sort of iterative in their process because they have the advantage of the web.
Mm.
And I think one thing I've noticed that's sort of consistent across all of the companies that I've worked at is this idea of contextual marketing. So
Okay.
personalization or sort of understanding, using data or different signals about your customers, and then leveraging that to deliver sort of relevant experiences or exciting experiences. That's something that I've seen the Bing team at Microsoft do a really good job of with some of their sort of like social proof. They have this really neat integration with Facebook where they can, generate search results that are relevant to you based on sort of what your kind of friends are sort of clicking on and what they're looking at, and I think that's really interesting. I think that LinkedIn is probably the king of this, at least in terms of the companies that I've worked at. Like there are obviously other social networks to do a better job, but I think LinkedIn has done just an excellent kind of democratizing data and information within the organization, to the extent that even the marketing team is fully fluent in SQL and other sort of languages like Python and JavaScript, and everyone is kind of getting
Wow.
involved in the data culture and using data to make decisions day to day, which I think is really powerful. So
That's
yeah,
incredible. I had no idea that marketers knew that kind of. I mean, that's impressive, right? I mean, it says a lot,
it
obviously,
is.
about
Yeah,
right. So you can have those conversations even that marketers traditionally haven't been able to have with the programming team, right? And then, of course, from there, come up with creative ways to grow using the data. Yeah, that's very
yeah.
interesting. I want to hear more about it, more like examples and things, but we're going to get into those hopefully. But first, before we even go there, I think it'd be great to maybe get out kind of an understanding of product marketing. So you're heading up product marketing at Optimizely, and it seems to me that tech companies have shifted a bit in the last 5, 6, 7 years from these teams of marketers, which sat kind of independently from the programmers, to product marketers. So can you tell me what is a product marketer?
That's a really good question. It's one that I think I've been asked probably 100 times since I started
That's a really common
call
question.
myself
Okay,
that.
good.
Yeah, I think that it's product marketing is definitely an evolving discipline. It's something that is a slightly different company to company. But what I found just in general, the product marketer is really the product expert kind of on the marketing team. And what that means is product marketers are they have a very deep understanding of the product, the feature set, what the benefits are of the product to the customer, and then they have an even deeper understanding of who that target audience is, who that customer is, or who that consumer is, depending on your business, and sort of what their needs are. And then I guess the whole idea of product marketing is about figuring out what the right set of product benefits are that map to those needs, and then determining kind of the value proposition, the positioning of the product, the messaging of the product. So just how we explain the product, how we talk about it, and then also how we bring it to market. And I think that involves not only the words we use, but also the channels we use. And so I think there's a lot of interesting product marketing that happens in product.
Mm.
There's also a lot of interesting product marketing that happens, through other channels like online marketing, events marketing, sort of display or things like that. So I think there's sort of it's a little bit of a mixture of things. It's kind of like I like to think about the product marketer is sort of the outbound kind of manager of the product, and then the product manager is sort of the inbound focused person.
Yeah.
So product management is really driving the strategic direction of the product itself, like what features does it need in order to achieve this sort of vision or this customer need, and then the product marketer is doing the same thing, but just around how we communicate the product. Like what does the product need to communicate, or what does it need to do in terms of a customer engagement perspective. So I think those are sort of the ways that I think about it generally.
That's interesting. And as you've been talking, I've been thinking that a lot of the marketers that I hope none of them are listening, but a lot of the marketers that I've worked with might be really uncomfortable in this sort of like world where they're so closely tied to the product. It hasn't, like in larger tech companies, obviously, I think though in the startup world, it's a little bit different. And I'm thinking of a few of the startup founders that I know who are programmers like they're trained programmers, but they really enjoy the marketing side of it, and
Yeah.
they've found themselves kind of pulling away from wanting to build and maintain a product to wanting to, keep connected to it, but do all that marketing and bring it, right, have the go-to market strategy in their hands and to experience that sort of thing. So it's interesting. I know it's not directly tied to what you're saying about product marketers, but you've
Right.
brought up that thought for me, which I think a lot of startups probably could appreciate. A lot of the startup
Yeah.
founders.
Yeah, and I think that what we're seeing sort of, at least definitely in the startup space, I think more recently, like there's sort of been a wave of kind of the designer as being kind of a really important person in the startup space. And I think that now we're kind of seeing the marketer also
Mm,
becoming more and more important, or at least the discipline of marketing specifically.
yeah.
I think that that's sort of a natural kind of evolution as like startups and sort of products become a little bit more saturated. There's more need for marketing, right? There's more need for understanding your customer and understanding their needs and how to kind of like cut through the clutter, which for lack of a better term, like I don't really like to use that expression, but that's sort of how I would describe it.
Yeah.
And I think just with all of the kind of innovation that there's been around marketing recently, and I think growth hacking has actually been a really positive sort of movement that's sort of helped elevate marketing as kind of part of the like into the conversation. With product, I think that it's all sort of like marketing's becoming more science than art. It's still very art and science, but it's sort of shifting more in that scientific direction. And I think all of these tools that we've been developing have been helpful in that. So
Yeah, and amen to that completely, right? This movement toward more of a science than an art, which some people find, problematic or like that's not the
sure,
point. But I think that people who are in the growth hacking world are take great comfort in that, and find that it's true, right? So I'm wondering, I mean, we do still keep the term product marketer separate from growth hacker, not, and that might not be for any reason other than people don't have titles called growth hacker in organizations. A lot do, but some don't.
right.
But what would you say is the difference, or even just the overlap, even between growth hacking and product marketing? Are they essentially the same thing, or what makes them not exactly the same thing?
That's a good question. I think that the difference can be really tactical
Mm,
because I do think there's a lot of overlap. I guess I'll talk about the overlap first. I think that the where they overlap is the growth hacker's goal in many cases, and this is just based on my observations. I'm sure many people will have different opinions on this, but it seems like the idea is to drive either user growth or engagement, right? So like
mm,
either driving more users into the product or driving more engagement with it once you have those users in one way or another. Sort of trying to direct behavior in the way that is sort of best for the product and is also best for users. And I think that can be a big output of the work that product marketing does. I think product marketing can function in that role. I think the best product marketers are the ones who do that. But I think that you could separate them out and say, this is sort of talking about the differences now. I think that product marketers are sort of further up in the funnel in terms of driving that sort of marketing strategy. So what that value proposition is, how to do like what the messaging should be, and that's all informed by this sort of customer understanding and this customer research. And I think the growth hacker is then that person who is sort of taking that and kind of turning that into action through different kind of in product levers. I think that there are other levers available, such as display ads or
mm,
PPC or blog stuff like white papers, things like that. Like there's obviously lots of like marketing channels that exist, and I don't think of growth hacking necessarily as a channel, but I do think it's sort of it can be sort of like a tactical execution of some of these things, ultimately to drive the goal of user growth or user engagement, which I think is a shared goal with product marketing. So I really think it's best when they're the same person or when they're on the same
mm.
team. But I can understand how like they can be different. The skill set can be slightly different. There's obviously more technical understanding needed to do some of the growth hacking things. But in general, I think that marketing is moving to becoming a more technical discipline.
Mm.
And I think that marketers who resist that are probably going to find themselves in trouble at some point because
Ooh.
I don't think that I don't think we're getting less technical by any means, and I don't think traditional marketing has as much of a place in this new economy. And so I think it's we need to sort of as marketers kind of change with the times and be more comfortable working with data and more comfortable working with engineers and with
Yeah.
product managers and I think that's sort of where the whole industry is going. So I'm excited about
That's one big sound bite, and I love it. I want to like quote it everywhere. I think it's great. We're not getting less technical, right? That alone says everything.
it.
So,
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah. So that really, I think, is a good way for me to now ask you some of the questions I've been kind of dying to ask you
Yes.
about growth hacking tactics almost. But
Yeah.
so, in your experience across all these places, optimizing LinkedIn, Microsoft, I'd like to know, and I hope others would like to know, what's been your favorite, growth hack that you've witnessed or that you've been directly involved in?
Okay, that's a good question. So I think that one of the coolest and most interesting things that we did actually at LinkedIn. LinkedIn did a lot of this sort of iteration. They have a lot of first party data about their users that I think is really cool. I won't give away all the details about this, but I'll sort of talk about it because it's pretty exciting. There's a page on LinkedIn called People You May Know, which many people who use the product are familiar with. It allows you to it uses an algorithm to determine people that you probably know based on certain social signals. And what that page does is it surfaces other members on LinkedIn for you to connect with. So one thing that we started to do at LinkedIn while I was there was interleave or sort of intersperse non-members on LinkedIn with the members of LinkedIn or people you may know. So if you
Huh.
go to the page today, you'll go to that page, and for the most part, you'll see people you may know who are also members of LinkedIn, but you may also see people who are not members,
Huh.
but who you also may know. And that's also based on sort of social signals. You know, perhaps you've imported your contact list in the past, or maybe you have connections who've done that. And so all that information is available, and it's being used for your benefit, right, to connect you with them and help you build your network, but it's also helping LinkedIn grow
Yeah.
by making it sort of more frictionless and more intentional around how you import your contacts. So I think that was one of the coolest
Yeah.
sort of experiences that I had at LinkedIn in terms of like a growth hack. There are some epic growth hacks that LinkedIn's done in its day that I wasn't necessarily involved with directly, but that's probably the coolest one that I can think of in recent times.
That's really cool. Very smart, right? Some smart people there.
There are some smart
No, but
people there.
yeah, it's very smart. So, so you were directly involved in this, and what did you see as the outcome, or what were the results, or how did it affect growth?
Yeah, so I think so. It definitely had a positive impact on growth. I can't share the exact numbers,
Sure.
it's a
Yeah.
publicly traded company and everything, but I
Yeah.
think that it had a very positive like the pros of what we did there were we had some customers some members at LinkedIn who were I think less comfortable inviting friends who weren't on LinkedIn into their networks
Hmm.
because people don't want to be spammy, you know, and people
Yeah.
don't want to just like import their entire contact list and spam all their friends. But there is something that's very, I think, smart about the intentionality of what we were doing with interleaving. I think it gives users the ability to just select a single person that they know that they feel comfortable with inviting,
Yeah.
and it does it sort of in the same area of the site where you would do this other very related action, which is connecting to people who are on LinkedIn. And
Hmm.
so I think it's actually pretty cool because it sort of removes the friction of having to ask you to go into this different mindset of now you're inviting somebody outside of the network. Like they're all in your network, right? They're all in your sort of sphere of connections. It's just a matter of whether or not they're a member of LinkedIn. And I think it should be that same sort of comfort level with inviting them. And I think that was one of the smartest things about this is that it kind of tapped into that and took advantage of it.
Yeah, definitely. So, what would you say? I mean, I'm thinking through how you can use that, right? Okay, well, how can you take that idea and apply it? But what do you think the average, growth hacker person listening right now can take away from that and like go and do with that, if anything?
Yeah, I think that it's obviously that's a very LinkedIn specific example. I think
Right.
that one thing that I really took away with it is that there are ways that you can sort of group kind of similar or complementary actions together and have them be kind of in a series. I think that users, especially if you have existing users on your or members or customers or whatever who are using your product, if they're going to get used to kind of doing certain actions and or you're going to create an experience that enables some action. And I think if you can tie those actions to complementary actions, I think you're better off. So an example of this is like this is sort of a very different example, but I think it relates to the same theme. At Optimizely, we recently tested this adding this call to action link on our results page. So when you have an experiment, an A/B test experiment that's winning and it's statistically significant, we have a link that asks you if you want to submit a customer story.
Mm,
And I think that's a really interesting idea because it sort of gets at the same thing. It's not exactly the same thing at all, but it's interesting because it's an action that's related to the experience that you're currently sort of participating in, right? Like
yeah,
you've got a result that is successful, and maybe you want to share it, right? And so that helps us because we get a customer story that we can share with
yeah,
potential customers,
yeah,
but it also helps you because you can promote your business and promote the win that you've just gotten. And so I think it's sort of a really thoughtful. It's about kind of making thoughtful decisions about surfacing actions
yeah.
together.
Yeah, I mean, some of the, more technical growth hacks out there are always like great to hear about, right? But then there are these kinds of things where it's still meant to grow, right? You're still doing it as something that will lead to growth in these different ways with content marketing, right? You need to create content.
Mhm.
So it's not the same as the other example you gave, of course, but
Right.
it's clever too, right? It's smarter than saying, okay, well, we as a business really would like to get more case studies on our blog. Well, let's send out an email asking for case studies. And it's like, why is our response rate low? Well, it's because nobody's thinking about it over there, like when they're
Exactly.
in their inbox. But when they're there seeing the win and feeling really good about it, and people, feel good is a very persuasive sort of technique, right? Or whatever the word is. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but getting people to feel good is persuasive. And so if you're in a positive emotional state, you're more likely to respond well to a request. So I think it's very bright. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good takeaway. Good thing to go right and look at what you need to get done as a marketing team and see how you can stop relying maybe on email quite so much as some people
Mhm.
would do and put that more in app. And when we talk about in app, it gets me thinking a lot about Optimizely again, who has recently added in the ability to do in app testing, which I think is brilliant, right? Like,
Yeah.
great, thank you. That's really good. People need to work on that. So I mean, Optimizely is really one of my favorite companies. You've got this really simple, beautiful solution to a problem every online business has. So now that's fantastic. Um, and of course, even with a lot of other split testing platforms out there, it's kind of like Optimizely has become the default, the one people talk about when they're talking about A/B testing. The first one you think about when you're a consultant talking to a client, you say, "Do you have a testing platform set up?" Oh no, you don't. Then everybody just knows to go straight to Optimizely, right? You kind of become the default without losing your trademark, which I think is great. Famously, you guys have had presidential candidates use your solution, right? So I
Yes.
mean, who's next on your acquisition list after presidential candidates have used it? But I mean, I really do wonder what does kind of up look like for Optimizely? What's next? Given that you're in this kind of earlier stage, but you've got so much success happening already. What's next? What do you see as next for Optimizely?
Yeah, I think that one thing we've really noticed with sort of looking at kind of how our customers are using the product, and specifically looking at our more kind of advanced customers and the things that they tend to do, and sort of also just thinking about how the market is moving. I think I mentioned earlier that it seems like we're moving toward this era of sort of more contextual marketing or more personalized sort of marketing, and I think the advantage of or the ability to do that is really is really predicated on the acquisition of data and the ability to leverage data and turn that data into action. And I think one thing that Optimizely sort of makes really accessible to marketing teams or to teams that are perhaps less technical or less or have less access to data is it sort of democratizes that and
Mm.
makes it accessible broadly. And so I think as we think about next steps, I think we're kind of thinking about ways that we can enable more of that sort of personalized sort of experience delivery. I think that some of our smarter, not smarter, but some of our more savvy kind of customers are using Optimizely in really interesting ways. They're using it to deliver personalized experiences, and we're seeing that increasingly more often, where people will be setting up campaigns that are targeted toward a select set of users for us based on some piece of information that they've collected about them through Optimizely, and then they're delivering that experience, and they're so different customers are seeing different things, and I think that's sort of the next wave of like, how can we make this more powerful and more automated for customers, and that's sort of what we're thinking about in the future.
And that's really interesting when we're talking about personalization, essentially, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So when I've seen personalization initiatives, they require a lot of content, right? You do an A/B test, you need two pieces of content that you're testing against each
Right.
other. You write a website without testing anything, you just need to create one piece of content. You personalize for different segments, and now you have a lot of different content to create.
Mhm.
Do you have any sense for how you might help people get over that objection to personalization, which is, how am I going to write four different web pages for these four different segments?
Yeah, I think that actually A/B testing can sort of be the answer to that. Not necessarily the complete answer, but I think that's how we've seen it kind of have its entry point. I think that what you mentioned earlier is really true. When you're creating an A/B test, if it's truly just a control versus like variant test,
Mm-hmm.
you're really only creating one extra set of content that you're testing, and I think that's enough to kind of get you started, right? Like
Yeah.
I think running an A/B test will show you whether or not there are certain segments or certain audiences that outperform the control or the mean. And I think the interesting sort of insight there is if there isn't a segment that outperforms, like perhaps there's the test is inconclusive, or perhaps the mean is just at a certain level, and there are no like outlier audiences there. Maybe you don't have enough audiences to kind of do personalization. Like there are some sites that have not a lot of traffic, and they aren't and they're very niche and they're very targeted, and so there isn't really a need for that. And I don't think it's necessarily right for every business, but I think for the vast majority of large businesses, certainly, like there's a lot of different types of people, and no individual person is sort of be the same. And so I think that they'll typically find that some profile or some demographic is outperforming. And I think it just takes that one sort of proof point, that one kind of data point to show that there's something there, to kind of instill that in a culture, right? Or at least to bring that into the conversation.
Right. And so when I hear about personalization, I think a lot about the problems with A/B testing and multivariate testing, obviously requiring a lot of traffic to get to
Mhm.
a point where you get that confidence that you need, and so on and so forth. All the problems that come with trying to A/B test when you're not Amazon.
Yeah.
But so the hope for me kind of has been, well, maybe with personalization, businesses that have less traffic can get more done. But it's kind of sounding like you're still going to need a good amount of traffic to use personalization effectively, because you're still going to be learning a whole bunch. You need a lot of traffic coming through. Is that accurate?
I think that the way to think about it is I don't think that's entirely accurate. I think
Okay.
it really depends on the business,
Yeah.
and it depends on the profile of the customers who are coming through. Like in general, the way we sort of like we work with a professor at Stanford who focuses on statistics, and he's been helping us kind of like articulate our kind of statistical methodologies, and improve kind of the way that we calculate statistical significance and statistical
Mm.
power. product. And I think one thing I've learned about this is that there's a difference between sort of statistical significance and statistical power, and they're both important. I think statistical power is where that volume kind of comes in, but you don't need necessarily huge volume in order to be statistically significant. So there could be, if you have two drastically different segments of population that you're serving, like I think of examples like there's very different use cases for, like, Lyft is the one that's coming to mind. Like, Lyft has their driver audience and their customer, like their buyer audience. What they've done a really good job of is having sort of differentiated content that focuses toward them. It's a really obvious example, but I think there are other examples where you can see even with a small amount of traffic, having a statistically significant result that also has sufficient power to be reliable, that you could go for. So I think it depends on, you probably won't see, like, let's say you're a site that has 5,000 uniques per month. You probably won't see a statistically significant result for a 0.01% improvement, right? Whereas LinkedIn or Amazon or Facebook could easily see a statistically significant result for that level of improvement. But that's a pretty small level of improvement. It probably wouldn't make that big of a difference for a business anyway, given the size. Again, it depends on how valuable each visitor is. But I think that in general, when it comes to personalization, if the personalization is good, the difference should be very big, and it should be meaningful, and the lift should showcase that. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind as we think about this.
Yeah, very cool. The difference between even just significance and power. I haven't really heard that much about it, and I work in the optimization world,
Mm-hmm.
and I haven't heard much about it. Do you guys have anything on your blog about that by chance? If
Yes,
not,
we do.
okay, good.
We recently posted a blog article about it, and there's also a link in our knowledge base that sort of goes into a lot of detail on that. I can share it with you if you
Yeah,
want.
I think a lot of people would be interested in that because I think the testing world has been so focused on, you post a case study on a test that you ran, and
Yeah.
immediately every other consultant on the face of the planet comes to your post and says, like, show me the data, where's your significance, right? And so
Yes.
we've been so focused on that confidence level and everything that goes with that, that it's good to hear about different ways to approach that question.
Absolutely.
So yeah, okay, very cool. I'm gonna look for it too, and help people listening who are testing look for it as well.
That
Um,
sounds great.
yeah, yeah. So I'm wondering, okay, you're at Optimizely. Optimizely does testing, helps other businesses test, and of course tests for itself, right? Is testing its own stuff. Um, so along the same sort of lines, which two or three that you know of? I know you're relatively new to Optimizely,
Hmm.
but which two or three tactics or techniques, or even just one like crazy unexpected tactic, do you know that Optimizely used in its early days and then continues to use to move forward? Like, what is the one thing that they did before that they could never give up doing? What could Optimizely not grow without doing if it came down to like one thing or two or three?
That's a great question. There's one that definitely comes to mind, and we talk about it a lot. If you go to our homepage, optimizely.com, you'll see our logo, obviously our tagline, and a URL address bar with a try it out button or a test it out button. That was a very early growth hack that our co-founders Dan and Pete did back in the day, and we continue to do to this day. It allows customers to enter a URL right into our homepage without having to sign up or create an account or give us any information. And then it puts them right into the product and allows them to start setting up an A/B test and making variations and changing content on the site. I think what's really clever about that and what's really powerful about that, other than the fact that it allows the product to speak for itself and showcases how simple and sort of magical the experience can be.
Hmm.
I think it also builds a lot of trust and value with customers. So I think it gives those customers the ability to start kind of developing something that's valuable to them before they sign up. I think we're not asking them for information about themselves until we absolutely need it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. I don't think it makes sense necessarily unless your product is not sufficiently valuable. I think that you should always be putting off the sign up until it's absolutely necessary. And so I think that if a customer creates a variation using our web editor and hasn't signed up, and wants to save it and try it out and actually reuse it, then that's when they sign up, and there's a need for them to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important sort of insight that they tapped in on early, and we've actually been we definitely would never explore sort of removing that. I think one thing that we've done, if anything, is highlight it even more and make it more prominent as part of our experience.
That's interesting. And I know, right, it's a lot of SaaS apps could do that, right? If you're
Yeah.
an online solution, you should be able to do that. It takes a little extra work, of course, to build that if you're just trying to like get your product out the door or something. But given the success that you guys have seen with it, so do you have any sense for how it has helped? That tactic has helped Optimizely grow. So when people could say like, okay, well, it might take more time, or it might make us rethink our cart, our whole way to get people to pay. But it's worth it because it worked for Optimizely, so maybe it'll work for us. Do you have a sense for how it's worked?
Yeah, I do. I think there's something very inviting and sort of like this is all kind of qualitative on my sort of perspective. We've A/B tested it heavily, but the thing that the insight I think that I hear the most often is it sort of reinforces the fact that the product is powerful and also easy to use, because we're just kind of giving it away, right? And I think that we're not trying to when you come to Optimizely, you don't get a marketing pitch, you don't get a sales pitch, you get the product and you get to try it out. Like we're not in the business of selling you sort of services and selling you like marketing. We're in the business of selling you this product that is going to help improve your business. And I think that's sort of the underlying message with that. And that's when we test sort of removing that and it doesn't work out in terms of signups. I think that's why like customers don't know necessarily what they're getting when they're just clicking on a button, but when they're entering their URL and they're actually experimenting with their site, they can see the value and they can experience it. Also, A/B testing is sort of this is kind of a different but related point is that A/B testing is not necessarily kind of a like in the growth hacking community. I think it's a very commonly used tactic, but I think that it's something that not many more mature businesses are familiar with, and I think putting customers at larger companies, like we have a lot of enterprise customers who are come from a more traditional marketing background,
Mm-hmm.
who may not be as familiar with it, need to see what it's like before they can invest in it. And I think that's another sort of byproduct of the fact that we've just made this thing so easy to use that customers can just walk in and try it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, super smart. Yeah. So I'm wondering then, I really want to know, I guess, also, like these are all really great, and I should be taking notes, but I'll watch it later and take notes. Any in-product growth hacks that you guys have done that you'd be willing to talk about or share?
So there are some.
Okay.
There are some that I probably shouldn't talk about.
Those are
Um,
the ones you should talk about. No, I'm just kidding.
so some things that we've done that have been pretty cool. One is sort of when we recently launched an iOS sort of A/B testing product. It's in beta, but it's called Optimizely for iOS. And if you have an iOS app, check it out. What we did in product was we noticed that there were a lot of customers who were running experiments on their mobile website app, and so what we did was we surfaced a sort of guided tour link into the iOS product experience from just from within that sort of app testing experience. So if you're setting up an experiment or looking at results for an experiment for a mobile website, odds are you may have or be considering or working at a company that has an iOS app as well. And so we wanted to make that sort of message available in product. I think there are some other things that we're doing that are sort of more sort of socially triggered. So if you have teams that are working together, there are ways that we can. In the past, we've sort of like directed customers to interesting experiments that are sort of doing well that maybe they weren't familiar with. I think.
Mm.
There's a lot of like under the hood stuff that we've kind of done over the years as well. That I probably shouldn't talk about now, but I think that one thing that's really cool about Optimizely is you can like we're always experimenting, and I think I think that we're trying to kind of live the ethos of what we preach, which is that experimentation is good and using data is good, and I think it's been going well for us. So yeah.
Seems to have been. Yeah, no kidding. So you're talking about obviously experimentation and data. I know a lot of people who are trying to grow or even just test come at things like, oh, let's sit around and brainstorm what we should do. Is that something that is part of your process for developing like new growth hacks or new ideas for what you can do? Or how do you guys come about new ideas for what you can work on?
So that's a good question. I think it's there are some situations where we'll brainstorm things. I think that more what's really interesting about Optimizely, so let me actually talk about some of my past experiences first, because I think that's helpful to have the comparison. At certainly at Microsoft and also at LinkedIn to a lesser extent, we would have brainstorming sessions where we talk about what we'd want to experiment with in terms of growth hacks. At Optimizely, I think that we're in this interesting position where we are a smaller company, so that might have something to do with it. But I think that more broadly, like we have a very rigorous sort of experimentation and kind of growth hacking culture here, and so we're always kind of talking about different ideas or different things that can change, and that we can experiment with. I think it comes up in a lot of meetings that we have. It comes up in casual conversations, and one of the great things about working at a company is it builds a product that makes it easy to do this, is that we can have a conversation in the morning about a hack that might be interesting to try, and then we can have it implemented that
Yeah.
and roll it out and see how it goes. I think it's just it's a really exciting time from that perspective. I think that there aren't a lot of controls as to what we can or can't test in the product, as long as it doesn't like totally break things. But even if it does, like we can turn it off. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's very enviable, right? That you're in that position where you can come up with an idea and then go
Yeah, I
give it a
don't think
shot.
it's totally unique to us either. I think that
No.
companies that are able to maintain this sort of culture of sort of transparency, or at least the democratization of data and making decisions about data, I think that if companies can embrace that and understand that there will be some times when things break, but for the most part, like everyone's trying to do the right thing for the company. If there's that trust there, I think that the output will be better. I think that people will be doing things that are more exciting and just more interesting, and probably more I guess less expected, more unexpected.
Yeah, harder for the enterprise level organizations largely to do. At least I found that when working with enterprise sized
I
businesses,
think
right?
that that's in practice that seems to be the case, but I think I've actually seen examples of enterprises
Oh,
that have
good.
been able to embrace this using Optimizely. I think it
Huh.
really matters what the tools are and what the culture is about the tools. Like how I think it needs to start, especially in an enterprise organization, which tend to be pretty sort of hierarchical and structured. It really needs to come from the top down. There needs to be executive level or senior level kind of approval of this type of thing. But I think that those are the types of companies that I think are the ones that are really pushing the envelope, and those are probably the ones that are more exciting to work for from an employee perspective too.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, well, that's cool. You kind of hinted that you know based on what optimized clients are doing about some cool things people are doing to grow their businesses. So, if you can share anything, you don't have to name names if you can't, but have um, seen any clients of Optimizely do anything very cool or get some very interesting results with their own, growth hacking initiatives or even just like A/B tests that they've run, whether on their website or, in app.
Yeah, so I can give two examples. One, I can give the name because it's a published customer story that I can
Cool.
talk about and I really like. And then the other one I'm going to try to not give the name and be secretive about.
Okay.
So the first is code.org, which is a nonprofit that has this goal of sort of extending computer science education around the country. They try to get basically they try to teach kids to learn how to code, and create sort of the next age of growth hackers,
Yeah.
which is awesome, and engineers. And I think so. One thing that they did, which was really surprising to me, just because the lift was so big, was they tested two different sort of headline and call to action combinations on their sign up page.
Mm.
One that was much longer and that sort of emphasized this aspect of community, and one that was shorter and more functional and was really descriptive about what code.org was. And they found that the longer one actually generated a 29% improvement in signups.
We have to pause because I'm a copywriter. So all the copywriters of the world are like clapping now, like, see?
Yes,
Okay, anyway, go ahead.
it's huge. I've never seen a headline test
Hmm.
yield that big of a result before. It was so exciting. I think that it really got to the fact that that their mission and sort of like their sort of the community that they develop is so important that it really just compelled their audience to sign up. And it actually resulted in that 29% lift translated to 18 million more registrations. So 18 million more kids around the country learning to code.
Amazing. Okay, very cool. Wow.
And so, sorry, did I say 8 million, not 18?
We'll just stick with
I'm
18
forgetting
million.
that.
It's
I'm
fine.
forgetting. Right.
Just kidding.
So the other one sorry, I can give much fewer details about, but I think is really, really neat is we have an e-commerce customer who tested the impact of using our kind of Blue Kai segment. So we've talked about personalization a little bit in this talk. Blue Kai is a data management platform that was recently acquired by Oracle. Is sort of an enterprise grade sort of solution, and this was an enterprise customer. But basically, what they do is they collect third party data. So they drop a cookie on customers' sort of web or I guess browser clients, and then as you go to different websites that are also in this Blue Kai network, they collect kind of data about you, and then you can use that from a marketing perspective in targeting. And I think there are sort of less expensive alternatives to this for those like smaller startups out there. But I think one thing that was really interesting was we had a customer who was sort of a they didn't have a very big kind of e-commerce presence on their website, but they were kind of growing that. And I think one thing they found was that among new customers coming in, they really didn't know who they were. They didn't know anything about them. And what they were able to do with Blue Kai data was they could set up Optimizely sort of segments Optimizely variations targeting Blue Kai segments. So they could say, okay, I know that this person is in the market for home goods, or I know that this person is in the market for X or Y, and then they tested the impact of showing their generic sort of sale that they were doing every season with sort of differentiated kind of sales that were specific to or differentiated sale promotional banners that were specific to the product category that they were interested in. So they actually didn't test any messaging change. They only tested the imagery on the banner. What they showed different product sort of pictures based on who they were, and they saw a very big lift. I can't talk exactly about the numbers for that, but they saw a very big lift from doing that, and it was interesting because they were able to test it based on individual segments of customers coming in. So I think it's just a testament to sort of the power of data, but also like an interesting story about third-party data relative to first-party data. I think a lot of companies nowadays, especially smaller companies, are really interested in gathering first-party data,
Yeah.
and that's great when you can do that, but it's also really hard to do. And so there are advantages to having access to third-party data as well that is really cool.
Big advantages from the sounds of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, I want to hear the number, but I know you can't share it. Too bad.
Sorry. Yeah.
It's a good story though, right? And a good lesson there too. Very cool. Okay, well, I've learned tons from you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just have, this one other question that I like to ask because, yeah, it seems like it usually leads to something that can be a little interesting as a final note. So, as a product marketer, Sean, what
Yes.
task in your experience do you dislike most but continue to do because it works?
That is a really good question. So I do like a lot of things that I do. I think that the one thing that I probably don't like as much is sort of the kind of events marketing sort of aspect of product marketing and just of marketing in general. The reason is because events marketing is, if you've ever sort of participated in an event before or gone to one or sponsored one, they're very expensive and they take a lot of coordination, and there's always a chance that people won't show up or that the right people won't show up or whatever, and even if they do, it won't yield sort of good results. They're difficult to track, but I think that I keep one thing we have here that's awesome is we actually have a person who does an amazing job at event marketing, and what she does really well, and why I think we continue to do it or participate in events is there are ways that you can kind of hack event marketing to make it really sort of scalable, and that you can make it really measurable. So that's using things like, I think that especially for younger startups, like if you're thinking of participating in an event or sponsoring an event, a mistake that I see a lot of startups make is they just sort of like set up a banner and a booth, and they kind of go there with t-shirts and whatever, and they hand things out and they try to get the brand out there.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely value in that, but you can't measure it and you can't take action on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are ways through in-person sort of promo codes or signups on site, and through sort of recording things like actually interviewing people who come to your booth and then giving them something for that, or maybe asking for feedback or having people complete surveys. There's so many ways that you can get value out of those events that I think are that are just really clever and really important to do if you want to sort of have kind of a scalable growth kind of way of doing that. It's something that I'm still it's definitely not an area of expertise for me, but it's something that it's one area where I think I've learned the most since I've started here is, how can you make those really impactful? So.
I didn't expect that to be what you were going to say. That's really interesting. I mean, event marketing or being involved in these events. So what would you say is like a goal that people should? So I'm Unbounce. Unbounce is running their first conference this September. They have an events person as well, dedicated. What would their goal be, or what is the goal of the average event? Like what, I mean, it's hard to say because there are
Yeah.
different types of events, right? But
That's exactly true. Yeah, that's sort of what I was going to say. I'd say so for a conference, if you're targeting your existing customer base, we actually just did our first user conference back in April, and it was really successful. It was actually way more successful than we thought it would be in terms of people who showed up and who attended. It was more than 200% attendance, which is great. I think one thing that's really important is to, if you're targeting existing customers, it's really to make sure that you're sort of evangelizing the product with them and giving them the tools they need to kind of be evangelists on your behalf. And so one thing that we did when we had our customer conference this year was we made available sort of promo codes for them to share kind of Optimizely with their colleagues and peers, and that actually worked really well in terms of a sort of a customer generation thing. We also did net promoter score surveys, and so I think NPS is a number that's sort of discussed a lot, and I think that it's depending on how you ask it and when you ask it, it can be extremely biased. But it's a really good indication of, it's probably the best indication that I can think of in terms of customer sort of satisfaction or customer kind of loyalty. And what we were able to do was do a pre and post sort of survey, sort of before they even had heard about the event, and then post after, like a month or so after they had attended. So the effect of the event had kind of worn off in terms of
the high.
Yeah, and I think that that's another way to just sort of gauge value. I think that one thing that I think about a lot more is sort of like participation in events that aren't necessarily targeting your customer base, because those can be really valuable too. And I think it's much easier to measure the value of those things. So like participation in industry conferences, there are definitely ways to use that to sort of generate signups and to generate just sort of like, net new kind of leads or net new sort of customers who may not have been, in your existing sphere of influence before. And so I think that it's a little bit of art and science. I think we talked about that before, but I think this is one that is something that I think there should be more sort of published about event marketing and how to do that effectively.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I wonder when you say there are ways to do it, like what are some ways, right? So you say we gave out promo codes. Like how? Like promo codes for people to share with their friends. Great idea. How did you do it, right? And yeah, so maybe we'll just start with that one. Like, so what did
Yeah.
you do to get people to actually take your promo code and hopefully then go share it?
Well, so what we did, so with this one specifically, we were giving them a promo code that gave them access to a beta version of our product that we hadn't released yet. And then that promo code was also shareable within their sort of like friend community for a limited amount of people that allowed them to kind of like invite other people into this beta version of the product as well. And so I think that it provided value back to that customer because they were getting early access to something that they didn't that they wouldn't have gotten if they hadn't come to the conference. But then it also gave them sort of extended value because they could share that and be seen as an influencer among their kind of peer group,
Okay.
which I think is really important.
And then also then when you're speaking at someone else's at an industry event, um, how do you how do you share? I mean, I know that when I speak at events, there's usually sort of rules around how much you're allowed to like say about your organization,
Yeah.
right? Like final slide, you can basically put whatever you want on that final slide while you're taking questions and hope that people like look at it and type it in or do whatever if you have a QR code, whatever you're doing. But what have been your tactics there when you're at industry events where others who are watching might be going too? How do you do more with those events? Like, what are some of the tactics where you actually get, is it handing out business cards? Is it just making sure you have those handy and just like give them out like they're candy or something, or do you give out candy, or like what do you do to what are the tactics to make sure that if you're at an event, you're taking time away from building your product or from, sending emails or updating your drip campaign or whatever it is, you're doing this, takes time and money. How do I get the most out of it? What are the tactics?
That's a great question. And I think it's important to understand that there aren't sort of any silver bullets. They're sort of like, they're what Ben Horowitz calls lead bullets. So like a
Ah,
lot of individual little tactics that you can kind of do to sort of chip away and make sure that you're doing a good job at this. I think, and again, I'm not the expert, but what I would say is uh, making sort of contact information. If you're a speaker at an event, making contact information available on every slide of your deck, right? Making your Twitter handle and your email address or whatever it is visible at any time, because you never know what you're going to say that might resonate with somebody and they're going to want to follow up with you on that.
hmm
I think being visible in the event is also a big deal. Having a business card available is helpful, but I think one thing that we've also found that's been kind of interesting is if you have a business card available with sort of like some kind of incentive on the card or
hmm
some sort of thing that kind of like a promo code, for example. Like I hate to keep saying promo code, but I think they actually really work depending on who the audience is. Those things can sort of live on and be shared and be reused, and it's a reason for somebody to pull that business card back out of their pocket or out of their wallet or whatever later and look at it again and perhaps contact you or perhaps just sign up for your product if they if they hadn't before. And so I think that there are sort of lead bullets like that. I think there's other things that you can do in terms of kind of like in the most important thing that you can do in terms of like lead bullets. I hate to keep saying lead bullets, but the best tactic is to just have really compelling, interesting content
hmm
and to leave the audience with something that they haven't heard before, or that or at least a way of thinking about something that they hadn't really considered.
hmm
And so that really comes from understanding who's going to the event
Yeah.
and how they think about things,
Yeah.
and then doing a lot of like research and understanding sort of what are the mental models that we can challenge, and what are the things that where the areas where I can add value based on my experience that's sort of different that they may not have expected.
Right.
And I think that can be sort of the best tactic of all when it comes to event marketing. So
Very cool. I like it. Good
yeah,
stuff there. That's great. And you were mentioning contact information. So, I mean, I've
yes.
had a great time chatting with you today. And of course, I wonder if like you can share how people can follow you or get a hold of you if they're like if they have a question?
Yeah, absolutely. So my you can contact me on Twitter. My handle is just my name, Sean Oliver, SeanOliver, and my email address is Sean@SeanOliver.me, me.
Brilliant. That's awesome. Well, it's been really enlightening. And, I know you're relatively new at Optimize, but it sounds like you're going to do amazing stuff there. I can't wait to watch what happens as you're there. That's amazing. Cool. Is there anything else you want to share? Any closing thoughts you might have?
No, this is great. I really appreciate the time. I'm very excited, as I said, to be part of this. I think this is great.
Cool. Yeah, I'm really excited for this to go up and be shared with everybody. So thanks a lot, Sean. It's been great chatting with
Awesome.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.